Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome University of Denver Chancellor Jeremy Haefner.
Well, good evening. It is absolutely a delight to see this hallway filled up with so many community, faculty, staff members here. I am Jeremy Haefner, the Chancellor here at the University of Denver, and it's my delight to welcome you to what will be a very engaging and very exciting discussion on the state of democracy here in the United States and in the world itself. Courage, integrity, tenacity, principle. These are the attributes of great character, of people with great character. And I don't think there's many people who will argue that great character and people of great character are in great need right now for this world that we find ourselves in. At the University of Denver, we have been asking our students to explore character, what values they have, what does it mean to be courageous, what does it mean to live an ethical life of purpose. So tonight's event with two very special people, people of great character, means so much to this University of Denver. And so I'm delighted to have the opportunity to host Utah's U.S. Senator Mitt Romney and the 24th Prime Minister of Denmark, former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen. Now, another U.S. Senator is famously quoted from a different state, Minnesota, Hubert Humphrey. He once said, "Freedom is hammered out on the anvil of discussion, dissent, and debate." Tonight and throughout this election year, the University of Denver will do a lot of hammering. More than ever, the importance of open, nonpartisan dialogue in general, and especially about the state of democracy, domestically and internationally, cannot be overstated. And engaging in this dialogue is vital to our students as they go on to become leaders across the globe. And so I'm so excited and pleased that the Korbel School of International Studies, in which you are in the building that houses that school, and the Scrivener Institute of Public Policy provide these singular opportunities to engage in this discussion, in this dissent, and this debate. DU continues to help and model this same approach to discussion and civic dialogue through a number of other events and lectures. And I invite all of you to stay tuned for those and attend those as you can. But especially I'm excited that the Alliance of Democracies Foundation, that is founded and chaired by our guest tonight, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, hosts an annual summit in Copenhagen to assess the challenges that face democracy across the globe. And this conversation is an inaugural complement to the summit here at the University of Denver. So I look forward to continued conversations like these. So I think it's appropriate that we should get started, don't you? So now for the formal introductions. Senator Mitt Romney. Sworn as Utah's newest senator in January of 2019, is a prominent figure in the United States, a candidate for the 2008 Republican presidential nomination and the Republican nominee in 2012. He also served as governor in the state of Massachusetts from 2003 to 2007. And prior to becoming a public servant, he has built an incredibly successful business career. Anders Fogh Rasmussen is currently the founder and CEO of Rasmussen Global, a strategic advisory firm, and founder and chairman of the Alliance of Democracies Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization for the advancement of democracy across the globe. And previously, as I've already remarked, he served as the 24th Prime Minister of Denmark, as Secretary General of NATO from 2009 to 2014, and the Danish Minister for Economic Affairs. At age 25, Mr. Rasmussen won his seat as then the youngest member of the Danish Parliament. And finally, one of our own, Dean Fritz of the Korbel School of International Studies. He has deep experience in public policy, in globalization trends, the political economy of development, and the politics of climate change, and the role of narrative in politics and collective action. He served as Associate Dean of Duke's University Terry Stanford School of Public Policy, as well as Duke's Director for the Center of Political Leadership, Innovation, and Service, and Duke's Policy Bridge and Global Policy Program in Geneva. He will be the moderator for tonight's discussion. Let's give a warm University of Denver welcome to our distinguished guests tonight and enjoy the show.
Chancellor.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Hafner, for that introduction. Thank you all for being here this evening. This is a very exciting night for us here at the Korbel School to talk about a subject that is at the center of the work we do here, and indeed has been from the beginning. Josef Korbel, who founded the school and for whom it is named, had an enduring interest in the state of democracy. And I can't imagine a more timely topic. You know, every era has its challenges. We could pick a number: environmental sustainability, economic inequality around the world, social justice issues. But it's hard to argue that among them, or maybe the most fundamental, is the state of democracy around the world and at home. And I cannot think of two better people, as the Chancellor said, to speak with us tonight about those topics. So a warm welcome to you, Senator Romney, former Prime Minister Rasmussen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let me begin with former Prime Minister Rasmussen as our guest here, and ask you to say a few words about the state of affairs around the world. You know, it was not too long ago that all of us thought that democracy was on the march. It seemed that it was inevitable with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the opening, even the openings in China, the protests in Tiananmen. Even as late as the Arab Spring, I think there was a sort of general confidence that democracy was on the march around the world, and yet I think for the last 14 years, the Freedom House has said that the freedom and democracy has been on decline. And if we look around the world at the so-called BRICS, who are in some ways the model: Brazil, Russia, India, China, all of them more authoritarian. Hungary, Turkey, Poland in Europe, Middle East. Brazil, we could go around the world. So, I mean, I guess the question is, how alarmed should we be? And what is causing this?
That's an easy question. On the latter, the brief answer is failure of democratic leadership. Before going into that question, let me say that in Europe, we follow the developments in the United States very closely. So did I. I still remember as a young boy working hard in my dad's turnip fields. I followed closely the developments in the United States. I admired the then President Kennedy and the Kennedy family. And I would take this as an opportunity to quote. It's one of my favorite Kennedy quotes. As you may know, the then Senator Kennedy wrote a book called Profiles in Courage. It was a book about 8 senators who had the courage to defy the opinion of their party and vote what they felt was the right thing to do. And in this book, Kennedy, among other things, wrote, "Only the very courageous will be able to keep alive the spirit of individualism and dissent, which gave birth to this nation." So first of all, tonight, I would like to say I am so honored to be on stage with what I would say a true profile in courage. My I said that the exact answer to your question is the failure of leadership.
Yes.
I think what democratically elected leaders have failed to do is to demonstrate real leadership and real statesmanship. We saw it during the Arab Spring. If democratically elected leaders had really focused on the strategic perspective, then we would have provided a Marshall-like plan to help them promote democracy. Instead, we turned our backs to the Democrat activists in the Middle East, and we saw how they failed in their attempts to carry out their dreams. We saw it in Libya. We saw it in Egypt. We saw it and we see it in Syria, just to mention some of the countries. So I think one of the problems is that we have lost our sense of history. The sense of history that the post-Second World War generation really grasped. They learned the hard way the lessons from the Second World War. And this is the reason why Truman established a new world order monitored by the United States. I think that's exactly that kind of leadership is what we need.
Just to follow on with that, looking out at the world now, so lack of leadership, yes. But as you know, surveys now, I think you've done some of them with the Alliance of Democracies, are showing that there's less confidence than ever in the world in democracy. That among the publics, really around the world, I think, less confidence that democracy is the path forward. Why is that happening?
I think, again, it's lack of leadership. But it's also lack of capability or willingness from democratically elected leaders to address efficiently the challenges of our time. For instance, when it comes to migration. Now I'm speaking about Europe. That's been a big question. People's concerns regarding migration was behind the Brexit vote. It's been behind the race of protectionism in Europe generally. I think democratically elected leaders in due time should have addressed that more effectively. For instance, we should have strengthened the external border control in the EU, because people do not trust the internal border control if they don't have an effective external border control. So in exchange for a strengthening of the external border control, we should abolish all the internal border control. In addition to that, we should also carry out a reform of our welfare systems. We should say, you're welcome in Europe if you will work, but you're not welcome to get welfare benefits until you have paid your taxes for 5 or 7 years. So that would combine free movement of people who are capable to contribute to our societies with a relatively high level of welfare. But politicians didn't deliver on that.
Well, we'll come back to the global scene, because there's so much to cover here, but let me turn Senator Romney to the U.S. Situation, and let me add my admiration for the vote that you made now just a little over 3 weeks ago. It must seem a lifetime ago that you were the Republicans or nominee for things have changed so much. Republican nominee for president. And of course, you've had a lifetime of engagement in public service. In fact, you're in some ways born into it because of your father. You've been part of and an observer of American politics for a very long time. I don't have to tell you that politics has changed in recent years. What is your take on where we are as a polity in terms of the tenor of politics today, and how did we get to this point?
Another big topic. There's been a realignment to a certain degree of our parties, and that is that there have been, for many years, if you will, blue-collar or high school-only educated individuals voted Democrat, solid Democrat. In the Midwest in particular, they lined up behind the union organizing effort and were able to solidly be counted on to vote for Democrats. They have moved over. President Trump has successfully moved them over from voting Democrat to having them vote for him, vote for Republicans. That's a huge shift, and I didn't imagine that could happen, but he did it. At the same time, he lost a lot of people who, in many cases, college-educated, particularly college-educated women who left the Republican Party and either became unenrolled, independent, or became Democrat. And so there's been kind of a reorganization, realignment of our party, in both parties. And the question is, well, what will happen post-President Trump? And I don't know that will go back. President Trump has unique talents, and is there someone else who'll be able to keep that coalition together that he's built? I'm not sure. But I don't think it's going to bounce back to the party of George W. Bush. I don't think that's going to happen. I think people will have begun to cement a view of the respective parties that's going to be difficult to adjust. I think that's difficult for my party because we're not doing well with young people. We're not doing well with minorities. We're not doing well with women. And if you're not doing well with those groups, it's going to be hard long term to be successful. So we're going to have to find some way, in my view, for our party to be realigned. Why did this happen? Why has there been, if you will, the growth of populism on both sides of the aisle? President Trump, with a very effective message of populism, successfully becoming president by pointing to a pretty simple message, which is, you know why we're having difficulty? Because we brought in too many immigrants and we buy too many foreign goods. And I'm going to stop the foreign goods and I'm going to stop the immigrants, all right? And that was the problem. And now we have Bernie Sanders, who's on the left, and he's saying, no, the problem is those billionaires and those big bankers. And they're the ones, and Elizabeth Warren, the same thing. And so there's this populism, this anger that both sides are able to tap into. Why are people angry? And you may have your own perspective on that, but I grew up in Detroit, in the Midwest. And people look to the leadership in government to take care of us. And there was a sense, we're going to open our borders and we're going to welcome in automation and computerization and so forth, and this will all make us better off. Well, it's made America as a whole better off, but it hasn't made the Midwest better off. And there have been areas in our country that have been disproportionately hurt. And I mean, if you're a person living in Saginaw, Michigan, and General Motors closes down their transmission plant, just what are you supposed to do? And the economists will say, well, but the market forces, people will move to where there are jobs. How do they move? If you got a home in Saginaw, who's going to buy it? You can't sell your home. You're stuck. You're there. And those people are understandably angry that government's saying, hey, everything's going to be fine, and the whole country's doing great. They see California making a fortune. These young entrepreneurs making fortunes on both coasts, financial services, high tech, but their jobs are gone and their future's gone, and they're angry. And so in a setting like that, it's a great opportunity for people who feel the same anger, feel the same resentment to take their message out, and it connects with people. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, again on the left, President Trump on the right. And that characterizes that's sort of the state of our body politic right now. People are very passionate about, I mean, I've never seen such passion on each side of the aisle. David Brooks from the New York Times wrote a column recently in which he said, you know, we've always had communities in this country, that African-American community and so forth, the communities that come together. He said communities are people who come together because they love the same things. Tribes are people that come together because they hate the same things. And we have become more tribal. We look at the other side and believe not just that they're wrong, but that they're bad. And we view them with contempt and anger. Now, part of that is the way we get our news today. Part of it is the nature of talk radio and talk TV, if you will, cable TV, the internet and so forth. But that's just the reality of what we have. And it's not very productive, because our government at Washington was designed to work on the basis of collaboration and cooperation and compromise. That's how the nation was formed. That's very hard to accomplish if people are tribal and are pulling very hard in the opposite directions. I'll leave with one comment this question, and that is that actually the people in Washington are nowhere near as tribal as the public at large. People get along just great. We get along, Republicans and Democrats, we go to dinner together, we do social things together, we travel together around the world in these we call them CODELs, these congressional delegation trips around the world. We get along great. But when the cameras go on and we're thinking about getting reelected, we better be pretty darn tribal, or we're going to get primaried as a Republican on the right, as a Democrat on the left. And that's just the nature of what the politic is like, and therefore getting things done to deal with the big three challenges we face as a country is very, very hard. And frankly, there's very little interest in taking on the major challenges that the country faces. And people are angry about that, and that builds into the kind of passion and tribalism I think you're seeing.
Yeah, well, it's a great overview of the state of affairs in the U.S., and I wanted to turn back to Mr. Rasmussen. You mentioned sort of growing up and admiring Kennedy and growing up in Denmark and sort of looking across the ocean at the United States. And I'm curious, as a European and as the rest of the world looks in on the United States, what difference does it make that I think to the outside world and probably to most Americans that politics looks pretty dysfunctional right now in the United States? What difference does American democracy make to the rest of the world?
It's a very bad example. We have always looked to America as, in your debate, it's very often called the shining city on the hill. Yes. People want to go to America, but they also look to America as an example of a vibrant democracy. It was the world's first democracy. And the Declaration of Independence has some very strong wording. So in that respect, America has always served as a good example. So a dysfunctional Congress sets a very bad example for the rest of the world. And I would say the lack of American global leadership is also what we're witnessing the consequences right now, because there is disarray within the group of free societies, and we see and we know from experience that when the United States retreat and retrench, they will leave behind a vacuum, and that vacuum is filled by the bad guys. And that's why Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, Assad, Erdogan, all the other autocrats, they have now got more room of maneuver. So you are setting a very bad example right now. And I would argue that American democracy it's not only historically, but also now a very important role to play. The United States has a unique geostrategic position. The size, the amount of natural resources makes America very strong Think, I mean, we are lucky that it is a benign democracy. And we should really support that development. We shouldn't undermine the role of America. And that leads me to the conclusion that the world needs a policeman. A policeman to uphold international law and order. And when the policemen try to retire, you will see international disorder. And that's what we are seeing right now. A superpower doesn't get to retire. So whether you like it or not, you are destined to lead. It is the destiny of a superpower with a global reach and the resources you do have to be the world's policeman. I know it's a very, very hard sell, but I have to tell you that as an America, as an admirer of America, coming from a small European country, what we need is a stronger American global leadership.
I can't resist now asking Senator Romney. It's almost become sort of a normal thing to say among American politicians, I think, that we can't be the world's policeman, we say. And yet, here we hear the suggestion that it's our destiny or our obligation in some sense. I'm curious how you respond to that, how you think about America's role in the world in that regard.
Well, I think when we hear the word policeman, many of us think, oh, that means we're going to be sending our soldiers to fight wars all over the place, and we don't want to do that again. And I don't think that's necessarily what has to happen for us to be able to influence global affairs. We have to have hard power. We also have to have soft power in order to be able to influence global affairs. But American presence in leadership is what I believe is essential. And following the Second World War, Harry Truman got together with Dean Acheson, his Secretary of State, wrote a book called Present at the Creation, Acheson did. They were talking about the creation of a new American foreign policy, which has formed the basis of our foreign policy almost until the present. And the principles of that were number one, America would be involved in the world. We would not be isolationist. We would play an active role in leading in the world because Truman recognized that when we didn't, bad things could get out of control such that they drag us in. And we ultimately would be attacked. We ultimately would be influenced. And the lives of Americans would be hurt. The idea that somehow being a leader of the world is not in our best interest is wrong. His view was, it is very much in America's interest to be a leader in the world, so to be involved. Number two, we would promote our values and democratic values, personal freedoms, free enterprise, that these things tend to be associated with more peaceable people. And number three, we would be strong. We would have a strong military, but in conjunction with that, we would link arms with our friends around the world. And by doing so and coordinating through NATO, we would be able to help shape events in the world and keep very bad things from happening. So it doesn't mean that we, by ourselves, run around the world fighting in wars, but it means that we plus our friends and through our leadership collectively are able to keep bad things from happening. And if we do withdraw from the world and we do not exert that kind of leadership, bad things will happen that will ultimately suck us in, along with our friends and allies. Now, I happen to look at where I think we're going to be headed over the next couple of decades. In my opinion, one of the great challenges of this century will be the emergence of China. China has an entirely different model for how a government should work and how a people should live. Personal rights is not part of that model. It's an authoritarian regime. And their economy will be larger than the United States economy by a wide margin because they have 1.4 billion people. All right, we have 300 and some odd million. So ultimately, their economy is going to be larger. Their military will be larger than ours. By the way, we get very excited about the fact that we spend almost $1 trillion on the military, more than anybody else by far. But do you know how much of that $1 trillion gets spent buying equipment, aircraft, ships, rockets, so forth? 15%. 15%. The great majority of what we spend our money on is paying soldiers, retirement benefits, education, housing, health care. And the other countries don't pay that like we do. They're buying hardware, and they're buying a lot of hardware. So China's going to, and by the way, China's not competing militarily right now with us. They're competing economically, and they have an approach that does not follow the rules of the road the rest of us are following. We believe in free trade, but not when someone's cheating as they are and following predatory practices. So how does a small country, America, how do we compete with a bigger country, China, long term? Only by linking up with our friends and having free nations say, we're going to trade together. We're going to tell China, unless you play by the rules, you can't have free access to our markets, particularly for strategic and high technology products. We need to coordinate with our friends, draw them closer. This whole nationalism idea, hey, you all go off and do your own thing. We're not going to worry about you. That's the exact opposite of what we need as we confront an emerging China. We need Japan and South Korea and Australia and Europe and others to come together and say, hey, we're going to collectively work together to foster our values and to convince China to be diverted from the course they're on, and instead a course which is more harmonious with the interests of the entire world. But that's not what we're doing, and we desperately need to get there.
Yeah. I was going to follow on just on that point. It does seem, if you look at the pretty much every president since the Second World War, since the Atlantic Charter, since Truman to the present, had this vision of the U.S. in the world, playing that leadership role, advancing our values, being interested in building the international system, a system of rules, so-called liberal order. You still believe in that? How much damage is being done now to that world order with respect to, in some measure, at least by the Trump administration, but there are other actors out there as well, in China not least of them.
Yeah.
How much damage is being done?
Well, I would prefer taking a different course with regards to international affairs. I don't think anything that's going on now is permanent, although people are recalibrating. When the president of the Philippines decides to cease an agreement to have joint exercises with our military after what we have fought for together with the Philippines, and instead to draw closer to China, that's a problem. When you read about the Solomon Islands, they're not going to recognize Taiwan anymore. They're going to put aside Taiwan, and then a few months later, we learned that mainland China has offered them $100 billion in loans. So China is aggressive and strategic in drawing in partners around the world. I point out that we have allies and they don't, and that's our great strength. But don't forget, one of the reasons we have allies is because we're strong. And people want to be associated and allied with a nation that's strong. If we start looking weak, why, they'll start recalibrating and making other arrangements to protect themselves. People act in their own best interest. So we're making decisions now which will influence that, but is it permanent? No. But the demand for American leadership continues to be great. Running for president, I had some great experiences. One was having the occasion to meet with Lech Walesa, the great hero of Poland and of the world, for that matter. And I came into his office. He said, "Mitt, you've flown across the ocean. You must be tired. You sit down. I'll talk. You listen." And then he said, "We need American leadership." And he said, "Have you seen what's happened in Iran and Iraq? Where's American leadership? And have you seen what's happened in Somalia? Where's American leadership?" And he went around the world, place by place. We need American leadership. And we do. And he doesn't mean by that we need American guns fighting wars. No. We need America to be involved with our soft power, to be making investments, to be working with good people there. We talked about, you spoke immediately at the beginning with the Prime Minister about the decline of, or the if you will, our sadness that so many of these democratic initiatives seem not to blossom. One of the reasons that is that we learned something we probably already knew but didn't think about, which is democracy doesn't just happen because people get a chance to vote. You need institutions, a free press, strong families, religions, unions. I mean, you need these things to form the basis that democracy can build on. So just because someone throws off their dictator doesn't mean they're going to have a burgeoning democracy. And so what does that mean right now? It doesn't mean we go out and try and convince people to throw off their dictator and have an election. Just having a purple finger that we voted does not make a democracy. What we need to be doing is building these institutions, getting a free press, making sure that there's not the censorship of the internet, and that religion is allowed to flourish. By the way, all religion, not just one, but lots of religions are allowed to flourish, so people have a broader perspective of what life is about. This is the kind of democracy building today. It is focused on building those institutions, and I think our failure to spread democracy as well as we'd hoped during the Arab Spring and so forth was that we hadn't done as much of the hard work on building the foundation as we needed to do.
That's great. I know you wanted to comment as well, Prime Minister.
Because I think the damage is, maybe it's not permanent, but it is clearly damaging what we're witnessing. Take the Middle East as an example. The fact that America has more or less disengaged, or at least signaled disengagement, has already had a significant negative impact. Not long ago, President Putin visited the Middle East, and the red carpet was prepared for him both in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. Why? Not because they love Russia, not because they like Putin, but because they hit their bets. They doubt that they could trust an American ally that has signaled a kind of retreat or retrenchment and disengagement in the Middle East. So it has had an impact already. Now, I think looking forward that what we need is an alliance of democracies. And that's why I established my foundation, the Alliance of Democracies, because until the situation, so to speak, has been normalized in the White House, I think we as individuals do have a responsibility to do what we can to establish those links between the world's democracies that can raise the voice of the free societies to counter the advancing autocracies. We also need what I would call a technological alliance of democracies, because we have to make sure that technology is managed by the good guys, those with principles we believe in. Technology in the wrong hands will be a force for the evil. Technology in the good hands can be a force for the good. So that's why we have to make sure that artificial intelligence, communication and information technology is handled globally based on the principles upon which we have created and developed our societies. So it shouldn't be the Chinese standard, but it should be the standard of the United States and the free world that should dictate or should manage the way technology is developed in the coming years.
Yes, and I wanted to pick up on that because Senator Romney mentioned the importance of the free press as part of the infrastructure of democracy. And even that language is sort of, almost connotes another era when the press was something a little different than it is now. And what we've seen, of course, around the world, and you're speaking of it now, is a fundamental change in the way that people get their information. And I guess what I'm hearing is that at least you have thoughts about the ways in which we can get a handle on that. But I'm curious both of your reflections on the complications introduced by this new media environment in which we are, in some sense, all of us, I suppose, in our own media bubble. We get bad information that confirms our biases. We don't get out of our bubble. That exacerbates our prior beliefs, et cetera. And even worse, of course, is the possibility of fake news or now deep fakes that are really worrisome. So I guess maybe you could elaborate more, or maybe I'll ask Senator Romney to jump in on this in terms of thinking about how we get a handle on that, because at the end of the day, good information is essential to the functioning of democracy, isn't it?
It certainly is, and I don't have the answers to how we're going to get a handle on it, but I believe we will. I believe we're going to get tired of deep fakes and information that's coming over the internet that's completely wrong, and there will be an effort to say we want to have more legitimate sources for our information. I think we'll move to that at some point. I don't know when that happens. Don't know how exactly it develops, but at some point we'll get tired of the explosive stories, the hair lit on fire kind of stories that we're seeing. I hope that's the case. And I know that right now technology seems to be working against us in that regard. For instance, we're becoming more polarized in part because we don't get the same facts. Not only do we not get the same opinions, we don't get the same facts anymore. And because if you're a Republican, you're watching Fox News, you get a wholly different view than if you're a Democrat and you're watching MSNBC. And in many cases, people are watching neither. They're watching their device, and their device has been curated to give people what they like to read. And we like to read things that confirm what we already think, but say it in a better way than we could ever say it ourselves. And so we,
that's right.
you know, and that's making us more polarized. There's another technology that gives us concern, and that's facial recognition technology and China's social scores, where people are given a score. And if they go to a church, they lose a lot of points. If they attend a church, they lose a lot of points, their social score. Or if they see someone who's a dissident, their numbers go through the floor. Facial recognition technology can determine who's gone to church, who's met with whom. They lose score. They can't get a job in the government. They can't get a loan. They can't get credit. It's devastating. And so the technology is a little frightening. On the other hand, there's some technologies that are pretty powerful. I don't think that the autocrats of the world will be able to censor social media forever. I know they're making an effort now, but somehow people are able to get around it. Some of the most tech-savvy people find ways of getting messages out. And ultimately, that's what brings down autocrats, is people who are able to express views that are not being brainwashed through government media. So I don't know where this is all going to land, but I'm more optimistic on this than I think most, in that I think we are as a people going to insist on having news that is not just curated for us, but comes from more reliable sources, because we're going to recognize the unreliable sources are maybe fun to laugh about and look at, but they're not giving us the truth.
Yes. And I know you.
Yeah, but I'm also an optimist.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in general, I think the new technologies is quite, frankly, it's a step forward, or many steps forward, because today you can communicate in a much more pluralistic way. It's easier for ordinary people to get their message across. Of course, there's also a lot of challenges in that. But I don't think the solution would be to weaken the technology platforms. But the solution is to strengthen the awareness among all of us about what we are seeing, what we are listening to. So we should be more critical. And in that respect, I think educational institutions like this university have a very important role to play. The young generation should be educated in watching all that with a more critical attitude. But basically, I'm very much in favor of the new technology, and I have used it a lot. At home in Denmark, my party and me personally, we were the very first to use the new platforms. So we have really benefited from that. And I think it gives a much more exciting and pluralistic society to use the new technology. So basically, I'm very optimistic.
This is great. I started on such a pessimistic note, and now, Let me give you a chance to say a bit about what you're doing with the Alliance of Democracies, because each of you in different ways is working on this problem and from where you sit. And you mentioned, I mean, you began by highlighting the importance of leadership and in both in failure, but also presumably in the solution. But could you say a bit more about how you're going about tackling this problem with the Alliance or other things that you're doing?
Yeah, it's very much in line with what Mitt said about democracy, because it's not democracy just to organize an election. Free and fair elections, it's good, but it isn't enough. To develop a real sustainable democracy, you need a strong civil society, you need strong institutions, and in the West, I would say, we have tended to be much too impatient. So we have to, a bottom-up process to make sure that we're not only organizing election, but we are also developing a civil society. That is the essence of the foundation, the Alliance of Democracies Foundation. It's a non-profit foundation. I established in 2017 because I think we all have an obligation to do something. I would say we have three main activities. Firstly, we organize an annual summit in Copenhagen, and we have discussed today, we hope in the future, we can also have a summit in Denver. At this university, so we will have...
Was that Denmark or Denver?
Denver.
Denver, yeah, okay, all right.
So we will have a summer summit in Copenhagen, midsummer. It's a wonderful time of the year in Denmark. And we will have a winter summit in Denver in the skiing season.
Yeah.
I hope that will be, that could materialize, because that will be the visible activity for the public, that we have this summit where we gather political leaders, business leaders, academia, think tanks to discuss the state of democracy and how can we strengthen and promote and protect democracy. That's one activity. Secondly, we have what we call a campaign for democracy. It's very much about educating young leaders in emerging democracies and supporting democracy activists. For instance, at the Copenhagen 2020 summit, we have invited the Hong Kong activist Wong and other activists and young leaders. Also in that respect, I think a cooperation with a university could be very beneficial. And we cooperate with the Bush Center in Dallas, the International Republican Institute, National Democratic Institute, on this program. And finally, we have a program called Expeditionary Economics. It's very much about developing sustainable free market structures in post-conflict areas. For instance, in northern Iraq, it's important that people feel that they have better life opportunities. Because one thing is to create peace, but if people are unemployed, then the young generation will potentially be a threat in the long run against that peace. So we have to provide better life opportunities for people by promoting entrepreneurship, developing free market economy in post-conflict areas. So these are some of the activities within my foundation.
Well, that's fantastic, and as you know, we are very eager to pursue this partnership, and you are all invited 1 year from now to the summit, which we hope to host. We're very excited about that prospect. Senator Romney, I'm curious, you told a fairly positive story in a way, that the electorate's more polarized than, in fact, the members of the Senate who actually still do talk to each other and get along. I worked for Senator Bradley a long time ago in the Senate in another era, and that was the case then, and it is good. But I'm curious, from where you sit, maybe you could identify or name some other things that you see as sort of positive signs, where you see things are better than we think, where you think that there are things that are happening that are going to turn us back around to the kind of stability and the kind of politics that we were talking about earlier?
Well, I'm going to be a little hard-pressed to come up with a lot of new positive material, to be honest.
That was it then.
Yeah. I gave you what I had, you know. I mean, there's a degree of concern on my part that we're just not dealing with things based on a long-term perspective as to what the country needs. And I talk about the big three. For me, the big three issues. And a lot of things are related to these issues. One, the emergence of China. Two, global climate change. And three, the amount of debt we have. We keep on adding more and more to the debt. And those things, feeding into them is education, of course, and family formation. There are a lot of things that feed into those, but those are three really big issues and are really not being dealt with in any significant way in Washington. And you might think, well, we're making progress on the environment. And the answer is, well, we do some things that are kind of window dressing. They're nice to talk about, but you know, just to put that in perspective, if we just deal with America and how we're buying our cars, whether they're Priuses or whether they're trucks, or how much energy we use in our washing machine, those are nice things to deal with. But if we get rid of every power plant in America and every car was junked, so we had no cars and no power, CO2 emissions in the world keep going up. So all the stuff we work on and things we're doing to make America more energy efficient and so forth, it's like, it's not going to change the climate. And so what is? And what is? And by the way, the reason they keep going up is because China and Brazil and Indonesia and India, where the great bulk of people are, they're developing and they're getting washing machines and cars and homes with lights and so forth. And so fossil fuels are being burned. And they, as developing countries, are not about to put in high-cost, very expensive systems that are not carbon emitting. So what do we do? And I spoke with Bill Gates, invited him to come speak with me because he spent a lot of time working in this area. And his answer, I think, is the right one, which is we have to have new technologies that we develop in everything from cars to airplanes to cement manufacture to steel manufacture. By the way, do you know how much of global emissions come from the manufacture of cement? 8%, right? A lot. So we have to have new technologies all throughout the economy that are low emitting and less expensive than current technologies. Otherwise, these other countries, the developing countries, won't adopt them. And so that's technology. And how do you get technology to be developed? How do you stimulate that? Well, one way is by regulating lots of industries, telling them they've got to come up with better technology. The other is to put a price on carbon, which creates incentives for people to find ways to reduce the amount of carbon that they're emitting. But we're going to have to, if we're serious about this, we're going to have to adopt this issue, and this issue along with many, many others. I'm concerned that we're not dealing with those things and that we're divided, polarized as a nation. And that we're not playing the leadership role we need to play. How do we fix this? And in history, when a nation or a civilization has been in decline and not fulfilling its mission, it's turned around under two circumstances that I could see. One is it faced a crisis of such substance that people woke up and decided to take action. Hopefully not a crisis so severe that it kills them, but enough that they wake up. And the other more frequent case is where there has been an unusual leader who stood forward and by virtue of their personal character has been able to turn the nation and the world. And I think of a Winston Churchill. I think of an Abraham Lincoln. I mean, our country, we were going in very bad places, and we had an extraordinary man who stood up and was able to hold our country together. I mean, without him, we wouldn't be here as a nation, as a single nation. So that's the kind of, you have to have a leader of that scale. Throughout my life, I've come to appreciate more and more the impact of leaders, not just at the top, although that's most critical, but leaders in churches, in schools, in classrooms, in homes, the impact that one person has on another. I happen to think that what makes America the shining city on a hill is not the policy decisions made by FDR or Teddy Roosevelt or Harry Truman or Dwight Eisenhower so much as it was their character. That individuals of character and capacity who cared about others and cared about human rights and cared about the vision of America, that's what made us who we are. And so we desperately need people of character. And that's not just people somewhere else. It's people in this room. It's all of us. It's people who make decisions based on what we believe is right, not what we believe is expedient. So so in this setting, what gives me optimism is that we are a people of character. The American people are good at the core. Lincoln talked about calling on our better angels. We need political leaders and leaders throughout our society who call on our better angels and do not call on anger and hate and disappointment, but instead call upon what our greatness can be. And I hope that we each take on that responsibility.
Amen. Now, I know our time is extremely limited here. I think there were some questions that we solicited from the audience, and here they are. We have time for a whole set of questions.
We'll be quick. These guys have been sitting on hard chairs for a long time.
Yeah. So let's see here. What I might do is I'm going to ask. There's some fun ones here. Senator Romney, privately, does the majority of Republican senators approve of Trump's policies and conduct? What do they say to each other behind closed doors?
Yeah, you won't report this, right? It's all off the record.
There's nothing.
The majority of Republican senators agree with the president's policies. We agree with conservative justices being approved. We agree with lowering corporate taxes. Why? Not because we're trying to make corporations richer, but because companies were leaving America and organizing somewhere else. We believe in lower levels of regulation, but still having regulation that makes markets work. So we, by and large, agree with what the president's policies look like. And I vote with the president about 80% of the time. And because I agree with conservative principles, and by and large, what happens in Washington bubbles up from the Congress, not from the White House. Right? The tax plan came from Paul Ryan. Didn't come out of the White House, came from Paul Ryan. And so we'll be on the same page there. Do Republicans, I can't speak for other Republican senators, but I think people recognize the president's strengths and weaknesses. And I've made clear over the last couple of years what I think his weaknesses are. I have said that in public. He's heard me say that in private. And I happen to believe that a leader has two main responsibilities. One is to set the right policies, and the other is to help shape the character of the people that he leads. And on the former, the president's doing pretty well on domestic policies. I have more difficulty on international relations. And on the second, the character issue, I've said in the past that I have concerns there and continue to have so. I think that's not lost on other people. There are some who are real cheerleaders of everything the president does, and there are others who like me, have more concern with some of the personal character-related activity. Or comments, and I mean, you hear all the time, people say, I wish we could take away Twitter from the president, and I get asked, I mean, when you go from my office in the Senate to the Capitol to vote, which we do virtually every day, there's a clump of reporters that are there at the place where the little subway stops, and we get asked every day, the president tweeted this, what's your reaction to that? And I listened to Senator Richard Burr. He said, if I responded to all the president's tweets that I disagreed with, that's all I do. And so they recognize that, but feel that at this stage we focus on the policy that we agree with. I wish I could tell you what I think is going to happen. My guess is the Democratic Party is going to nominate Bernie Sanders, and if the Democratic Party does that, I'm convinced that the president will get reelected in a landslide. Now, is there a chance that Bernie Sanders could win? Sure there is. I don't know, 25, 35% chance. But I still think far more likely the president would win in a very, very large number. So we'll be working with him over some period of time, if that's right.
And it will be an interesting season, won't it? Prime Minister Rasmussen, here's another easy one. What is the best way to confront Russia's intervention in other countries' elections?
How to prevent it?
Yes.
Yeah, firstly,
I'm just reading them.
Yeah. But I think, first of all, it is important to raise awareness because the more we are focused on the risk of interference, the more critical we will be when we watch a video or see some social media uploads or whatever it might be. So that's one thing. Secondly, of course, we also need to use new technology. For instance, fake news, deep fake news, or deep fake. It's a video that pretends to be a political leader saying something terrible. But it's not that political leader. It's a deep fake. You see Trump, and his voice is like Trump. He speaks like Trump, but it's not Trump.
By the way, all the stupid things I've said were deep fakes. They were all deep fakes. I never said those dumb things.
So, yeah, but I say it because I established, together with Joe Biden, what we call a Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity. It's a commission that monitors election worldwide and also sponsors development of new technologies. We produced a video with three editions of Trump. One true Trump and two fake Trumps. One fake Trump where we asked an actor to pretend to speak like Trump, and one where we used new technologies, machine learning. And then we asked people to identify the true Trump and the fake Trumps. They couldn't. There may be good reasons why it's difficult to distinguish when it's Trump, what is true and what is not. But it's a bit scary that it's impossible for people to really distinguish. If such a video is released 3 days before an election, you can't counter it. But you can develop new technology where you, through algorithm, can identify with a high probability that this is fake. And then you can make a note, this is probably fake. So that's also part of preventing Russia from interfering, to use the new technology.
That's great. Well, I'm getting the sign that we really are out of time. 30 seconds each, really, for the young people and our students in the audience. You both had lives of public service in Denmark and Europe and elsewhere in the United States. Why should young people be engaged? Why should young people? Why? I think so many look at this mess and say, "I don't want any part of it. I'm just going to do my." I will do my business or whatever else they do. Why be engaged? Why? What would you say to people about the virtues of being part of this? 30 seconds each, and then I'll be in trouble.
The best way to answer that question very briefly would be to paraphrase Edmund Burke, who once said, "The only thing needed for the evil to succeed is for good men to do nothing." So that would be my message to the young generation. You should engage, because if you don't, the evil will succeed. And based on my experience from a long life, long public life, it is rewarding. It gives you a lot to really engage in public life. If you don't, there is a clear risk that you will live a very empty life. So that would be my message to the young generation: engage.
Thank you. Senator Romney.
I would note this, which is engaging does not necessarily mean getting into politics, all right? Because changing the world and changing our country is not a function of being a political person. By the way, if you get the chance to run for president, do it. It's a lot of fun. But most will not. Most will follow other courses in medicine, in education, in business, in the law. But what I said earlier on about the character of the country and what it is that makes America the leader we have been is true not because of just a political leader, but because of leaders throughout our society in enterprises of all kinds. And so being actively involved and living in a way that is consistent with your fundamental values, having a conscience and being able to sleep at night because you do what you think is absolutely right, is something which I prescribe for everyone. And recognize that you're having an impact on the greatness of America and the purpose of America by living in a way that has integrity with your fundamental values. I can tell you that as a political person, there are a couple of times I have taken positions or said things that were more expedient than they were based upon conviction. And I remember those things precisely, and I regret them enormously. And I've said, I'm not doing that again. I've reached a point in my life where I look back and I say, all the things I've done in my life, I think those couple of things really stand out. And they really bother me, even to the years, decades later. And I'm not going to do that anymore. And so what I can tell you is in terms of living with integrity and living in a way that's consistent with your values, don't do things that are just expedient because they think they'll help you get ahead. Far more valuable to you long term is to live in a way that's consistent with your conscience. Don't let your conscience be indicted by your sense of right and wrong. So I can tell you, do what you believe is right, and don't worry about the profession you're in. Don't have to get involved in politics. Be involved wherever you are and live in a way which is consistent with the fundamental values which are in your heart. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you both so much. It's been an extraordinary conversation about leadership, integrity, and values. I can't think of two better examples for all of us to follow. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
this evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.